General Ezevu stood on the command bridge of the Cravaxian Glory, his flagship and the pride of the Imperial fleet. Through the vast view screen, a blue-green planet grew steadily larger against the black canvas of space. Earth, as the natives called it, such a simplistic name for a world that had unexpectedly managed to repel the initial contact fleet. Ezevu let out a rumbling laugh that echoed across the bridge, causing several junior officers to glance up from their stations momentarily before returning to their duties. His two yellow eyes gleamed with amusement as he regarded the approaching planet. His grey, leathery skin stretched taut over a prominent ridge of bone that crowned his skull like a natural helmet, the mark of a high-ranking Cravaxian warrior. "Something amuses you, General?" asked Cranato, his assistant and second-in-command, approaching with a data tablet clutched in one of his five-fingered hands. Cranato's more slender frame and lighter grey complexion marked him as from the administrative caste, though the faint scarring across his neck and shoulders spoke of military service in his younger years. His own two yellow eyes blinked rapidly, not hiding his curiosity. "These humans," Ezevu replied, gesturing towards Earth. The general's muscular arm extended from beneath an ornate shoulder guard, his 5 long fingers splaying wide in dismissal. "I was just thinking about how they must be celebrating their victory against our scout ships, as if that pitiful resistance means anything in the grand scheme of things." Cranato nodded, his two yellow eyes now blinking in synchronized sequence, a sign of agreement in Cravaxian body language. The thin membrane that served as his outer eyelid glistened slightly under the ship's lighting. "They have no concept of what awaits them." Ezevu turned fully to face his assistant, his dual-jointed legs shifting with a fluid grace that belied his massive size. His towering frame, nearly 8 feet tall, made even Cranato appear small by comparison. The ceremonial armor he wore, reserved for conquest missions, shone with a dull metallic sheen, embedded with beautiful crystals. "Let me explain something, Cranato," Ezevu said, beckoning his assistant closer. "What the humans faced 8 local years ago was nothing more than our standard first contact protocol. A handful of scout ships, merely a formality, really." "I understand, General, the standard procedure for expansion." "Precisely. Those initial vessels are usually more than sufficient for most worlds where force proves necessary." Ezevu began to pace along the command deck, his 2 legs moving slowly. "We've conquered 67 worlds with that exact same fleet configuration. 67 worlds that now contribute resources and subjects to the glory of the Cravax Empire." Cranato kept pace beside him. "And yet the humans managed to destroy all 7 scout ships." "A temporary setback," Ezevu said dismissively, "and frankly, a welcome one. It's been too long since I've commanded a proper military campaign. These humans have no concept of what true Cravaxian military might looks like." He gestured expansively towards the view screen, showing the vast armada surrounding them. 200 warships of varying classes, each one substantially more powerful than the entire scout fleet combined. "General," called the navigator from her station, "we've just passed the gas giant the humans call Jupiter. We will reach Earth orbit in approximately 17 minutes. Ezevu nodded. "Very good, Threxely. Maintain current velocity." He turned back to Cranato. 2 local years, he mused. "That's how long it's taken for the scout fleet's distress signal to reach Cravax Prime. And then many more for us to assemble a proper response force. 8 years for these humans to prepare, to fortify, to imagine they have a chance." "Do you think they've advanced significantly in that time, General?" Cranato asked. Ezevu snorted, a harsh sound that conveyed both amusement and dismissal. "Our intelligence paint a clear picture. They were already splitting atoms when our scouts arrived. Primitive, yes, but not without some basic technological achievements. But 8 years? It takes civilizations centuries to make meaningful technological leaps. No, whatever defenses they've prepared will be laughably inadequate." As Earth grew larger in the view screen, Ezevu straightened his posture, adopting the formal bearing expected of a general of the Kravax Empire. "Attention all personnel," he announced, his voice carrying through the bridge and being transmitted to every ship in the fleet. "We are approaching the target planet. Raise shields and power weapon systems. Prepare for potential hostilities upon arrival." The bridge came alive as officers relayed his commands and prepared the ship for potential combat. "Kranato," Ezevu said, "I want a preliminary analysis the moment we achieve stable orbit. Full spectrum scans. Atmospheric composition, electromagnetic emissions, population centers, military installations. I want to know everything about this planet before we make our presence known." "Yes, General," Kranato responded, already coordinating with the various departments through his communication implant. "Analysis teams are standing by." The next 15 minutes passed in disciplined silence, broken only by the occasional status update from various stations. As they entered Earth orbit, Ezevu studied the planet with interest. Unlike many worlds the Kravax had conquered, Earth had vast oceans, an uncommon feature that could complicate ground operations, but it was nothing his forces hadn't handled before. "Beginning passive scans now, General," reported the Chief Science Officer. "Active scanning will commence momentarily." "Very good. Proceed with caution. Let's not announce our presence too boldly just yet." Kranato approached a few minutes later, data tablet displaying a stream of incoming information. "General, preliminary findings are unusual." Ezevu turned his full attention to his assistant. "Explain." "We're detecting extensive evidence of warfare, as expected," Kranato began, manipulating the tablet to display various readings. "There is debris from our scout ships in low orbit, along with what appears to be the remains of human orbital platforms and satellites." "That aligns with our expectations," Ezevu noted. "The humans would have defended their orbital space first." "Yes, but there's more," Kranato continued, looking troubled. "We're detecting abnormally high radiation levels in the planet's atmosphere, consistent with large-scale deployment of atomic weapons." This gave Ezevu pause. "They used nuclear weapons against our scouts?" "It's unclear, General. The radiation pattern is too widespread to be sure." Ezevu's eyes narrowed as he considered this information. "A civil war, perhaps, triggered by our arrival?" "Not impossible, but there's one more concerning finding." Kranato hesitated. "We're detecting minimal signs of human population." "Elaborate." "There are small, scattered settlements, primarily in remote regions, but the large urban centers that our intelligence identified as the source of resistance against our scouts, they appear largely abandoned." Ezevu stared at Earth for a long moment before breaking into laughter once more, this time louder and more sustained. "General?" Kranato inquired cautiously. "Do you realize what this means, Kranato?" Ezevu asked, still chuckling. "We traveled across 17 star systems, assembled the largest expeditionary force since the Third Expansion era, all to conquer a world that has no chance of resisting." The bridge crew exchanged glances, uncertain how to respond to their commander's amusement. "How pathetic," Ezevu continued. "These humans defeated our ships and perished in the aftermath. Perhaps they realized the futility of resisting the Kravax Empire and chose self-destruction rather than submission." "That would be unprecedented behavior," Kranato observed. "Indeed, but it seems we have little resistance to concern ourselves with," Ezevu stroked his chin thoughtfully. "Still, we should be thorough. Deploy autonomous scanning units to the surface. I want detailed ground reconnaissance before we commit any personnel." "Yes, General, right away." As Kranato relayed the orders, Ezevu returned to the central view screen, studying the planet that had briefly defied Kravaxian expansion. "To think we came all this way for an empty victory," he muttered. "The Emperor will be most displeased." Several hours passed as the fleet maintained its orbital position, autonomous drones skimming Earth's atmosphere and penetrating deeper to scan the surface. The data they returned was compiled, analyzed, and presented to General Ezevu in the Kravaxian Glory strategy room. "The analysis is complete, General," Kranato announced, standing before a holographic projection of Earth. Various points on the globe were highlighted, small green dots indicating detected human settlements, red markers showing evidence of destruction, and blue indicators representing unusual phenomena that warranted further investigation. And your conclusions? Ezeview asked, circling the projection. The human civilization appears to have suffered a catastrophic collapse, Cranato explained. As we suspected, there are surviving indigenous populations in scattered locations, primarily mountainous regions, some coastal areas, and a few desert territories. The urban centers that once housed the majority of their population and likely orchestrated the defense against our scouts are largely abandoned. Any signs of organized military resistance? None that we can detect from orbit. There are some structures that could be fortifications, but they appear unmanned and completely abandoned. Ezeview grunted thoughtfully. What about their nuclear capabilities? Could they still pose a threat? Unlikely, General, unless they hid them too deep underground. The General nodded, making his decision. Then it is time to establish our presence on the surface. We'll claim this world for the Empire as planned, even if it's little more than a hollow victory. Shall I prepare the entire fleet for planetary deployment? Cranato asked. No, Ezeview replied after a moment's consideration. We'll divide our forces. 2/3 of the fleet will remain in orbit to maintain our space superiority and continue scanning operations. I will personally lead the ground expedition with the remaining third. One of the junior officers, a young lieutenant named Graxar, spoke up hesitantly. General, if I may, is committing to ground operations so soon wise? The scans could reveal more with additional time, and the oceans are too vast to map quickly. There could still be advanced human weapons we haven't accounted for. Ezeview fixed the lieutenant with a steady gaze, causing the young officer to straighten nervously. Then, unexpectedly, the general laughed. Your caution is noted, Lieutenant, but unnecessary. I have led campaigns on 31 worlds across 4 galactic arms. Do you know where I have always been most effective? No, General, Graxar replied. On the ground, Ezeview stated firmly. I have always been more confident defending a position on land than commanding captains and ships from orbit. Besides, whatever primitive weapons these remaining humans might possess, they cannot possibly stand against Kravaxian battle armor and infantry tactics. Graxar nodded, appropriately chastised. Of course, General, my apologies. No apology necessary, Lieutenant. Caution has its place in warfare, but so does decisive action. Ezeview turned back to Cranato. Begin preparations immediately. I want landing vessels ready within 2 hours. We'll establish our primary outpost in what the humans once called North America. There's a suitable clearing near one of their abandoned cities that will serve our purposes well. Yes, General, Cranato acknowledged, already transmitting the orders through his implant. The next 2 hours were a flurry of coordination as the fleet separated into 2 groups, the orbital defense force and the landing party. Ezeview's personal battlecruiser, along with 60 support vessels of varying sizes, broke formation and began their descent towards Earth's atmosphere. From the command deck of his ship, Ezeview watched as the blue expanse of sky enveloped the view screen. A slight tremor ran through the vessel as it encountered atmospheric resistance, but the advanced Kravaxian engineering easily compensated for the turbulence. "Atmospheric entry is stable, General," reported the pilot. "We're adjusting trajectory for the designated landing zone." "Excellent," Ezeview replied, feeling the familiar surge of anticipation that always accompanied planetary deployment. Despite having conquered numerous worlds for the Empire, there was always something uniquely satisfying about setting foot on a new planet, especially one that had offered resistance, however briefly. As they descended through layers of cloud, the landscape below gradually came into focus. Vast forests stretched in every direction, occasionally broken by the geometric shapes of abandoned human structures. In the distance, the crumbling silhouette of what had once been a major city. "Atmospheric analysis complete, General," announced the environmental officer. "Composition is primarily nitrogen and oxygen, with trace amounts of other gases. Radiation levels are elevated compared to Kravax standard, but within safe parameters for our personnel. Temperature and pressure are both within comfortable ranges for our species. So we won't need environmental suits, as of you noted with satisfaction. Good. I prefer to feel a world beneath my feet when I claim it. Landing zone in sight, General, the pilot reported, touching Dan in 30 seconds. As if you felt the subtle shift in the ship's momentum as it slowed for landing. Through the view screen, he could see the clearing they had selected, a flat expanse of what had once been a human recreational area, now overgrown with vegetation, perfect for establishing their initial outpost. The ship settled onto the surface with barely a jolt, a display of the pilot's skill. Around them, the support vessels were landing in quick succession, forming a defensive perimeter around the central command ship. "Landing successful, General," Cranato reported. "All vessels report secure touchdown." "Initiate deployment procedures," as of you ordered. "I want a defensive perimeter established, construction units deployed, and reconnaissance teams ready to survey the surrounding area." As his orders were relayed, as of you made his way to the ship's exit bay, he stood before the massive door, flanked by his personal guard, 6 elite warriors in gleaming battle armor. The door slid open with a hydraulic hiss, revealing the world beyond. Earth sunlight streamed in, brighter than the artificial illumination of the ship. As of you stepped forward, his booted feet touched alien soil for the first time. The air that filled his lungs was rich and humid, carrying the sense of vegetation and distant water. Above, the sky was a shade of blue more intense than any he had seen on other worlds. "A beautiful planet," he remarked to Cranato, who had followed him out. "A shame its inhabitants couldn't appreciate what they had." "Indeed, General," Cranato agreed, activating his portable scanner. "The local flora appears remarkably diverse. Our biologists will have much to study." As if you surveyed the landing zone, now filled with activity as Kravaxian soldiers established defense positions and engineers unloaded construction materials. In the distance stood the remnants of human structures, crumbling buildings partially reclaimed by nature. "Have those human constructions classified and catalogued," as if you instructed, pointing towards the abandoned buildings. "Anything of technological or cultural significance is to be preserved for study. Everything else can be demolished to make way for our outpost." "Yes, General. I'll assign a team immediately." As Cranato moved away to relay the orders, Ezevu strode further into the clearing, enjoying the sensation of solid ground beneath his feet after months in space. This would be a straightforward operation. Establish a beachhead, expand outward, catalog any remaining human technology that might be of use to the Empire, and begin the process of transforming Earth into another productive world under Kravaxian rule. He was about to return to overseeing the unloading process when something caught his attention. A small puddle of water near his feet, likely from recent rainfall, was exhibiting strange behavior. Tiny ripples spread across its surface in irregular patterns. Curious, Ezevu crouched down to examine the phenomenon more closely. As he did, he became aware of something else, a subtle vibration coming through the ground. "Cranato," he called, his voice sharp with sudden concern. "Are we detecting any seismic activity in this region?" Before his assistant could answer, the vibration intensified dramatically. The ground beneath them shuddered, then began to shake with increasing violence. Around the landing zone, Kravaxian soldiers lost their footing, supply crates toppled, and equipment crashed to the ground. Ezevu braced himself, managing to remain standing as the tremor continued. This was no natural occurrence. The pattern was too regular, too purposeful. In his long military career, he had experienced many things, but this sensation triggered an unfamiliar emotion: uncertainty. As the shaking grew stronger, a realization dawned on him. This was not seismic activity. This was something else entirely. Something was coming. And for the first time since arriving at Earth, General Ezevu was not laughing. As the ground continued to tremble beneath his feet, General Ezevu's attention was suddenly drawn upward by a flash of brightness in the sky. What started as pinpricks of light rapidly expanded into glowing lines streaking across the atmosphere, a pattern he had witnessed on too many battlefields to mistake for anything else. Missiles. Thousands of them. His 2 yellow eyes widened as he tracked their ascent. A cold fear gripped him as he realized the immediate danger. Defense measures, now! Ezeview roared, his voice cutting through the confusion as the tremors intensified. All personnel, prepare for incoming attack! Protect the ships! In his mind, there was only one possibility. These missiles were targeting his landing party and the ships they had just brought to the surface. Their scans had shown no functional human launch facilities, no military installations capable of this kind of coordinated attack, yet here they were, facing what appeared to be an imminent bombardment. The landing zone erupted into motion as Kravaxian soldiers rushed to implement defensive protocols. Ground crews abandoned their unloading operations and sprinted back towards their ships, while weapons officers activated the interception systems on their ground vehicles. The low whine of defense platforms powering up filled the air, competing with the rumble of the continuing tremors. "General!" Cranato called out, his voice strained as he struggled to maintain his footing on the shaking ground. "Something's wrong with those trajectories! They're not—" His words were cut short as the sky above them suddenly transformed from blue to blinding white. As his vision cleared, he saw Cranato beside him. The assistant's uniform singed and his grey skin darkened by the fear. Around them, Kravaxian soldiers were picking themselves up, some injured in the chaos, others simply disoriented. "Status report," Ezeview demanded, pulling himself to his feet. What just happened? Cranato was already at his communication terminal, frantically attempting to establish contact with the fleet in orbit. "General, I can't reach the orbital command. All channels are silent." "Keep trying," Ezeview ordered, though a cold realization was already settling in his stomach. That explosion had been thermonuclear, far more powerful than anything their intelligence had suggested the humans still possessed, and if the missiles had been directed towards orbit— "Sir," one of the communication officers called out, his voice hollow with shock. "Long-range scanners indicate massive debris fields in orbit, consistent with our fleet configuration." Ezeview stood frozen, his mind refusing to process what he was hearing. 2/3 of his invasion force, over 130 warships, the pride of the Kravaxian navy, gone in a single coordinated strike of thousands of missiles. "That shouldn't," he whispered. "Their technology was nowhere near advanced enough to—" "General!" Cranato interrupted, his voice steady despite the grim news. "We're receiving telemetry from the few remaining ships. They confirm multiple simultaneous nuclear detonations in high orbit. The space was saturated by numbers. Those that weren't destroyed outright are now drifting, defenseless." For a moment, the only sound was the crackle of damaged equipment and the groans of confused soldiers. The tremors had not ceased, but their mind was too busy to notice. Ezeview's shock quickly hardened into cold rage. "These humans," he snarled, addressing the gathered officials. "They're cowards. They struck when we least expected, sacrificing their own population to catch us off guard." He gestured toward the distant, abandoned city. "That's why the urban centers were empty. They knew we were coming and prepared a trap." The words felt hollow even as he spoke them, but he continued nonetheless, trying to rally his remaining forces. "The ships in orbit are lost. We must focus on our ground forces now. "General!" Officer Graxar interrupted, his voice cracking with urgency as he stared at his sensor display. "We're detecting massive movement from beneath the surface. Subterranean installations are opening all around us. Vehicles and infantry emerging by the millions." Ezeview rushed to the display, watching in disbelief as the sensor readings confirmed Graxar's report. Hidden bunkers and underground facilities were opening across the landscape, disgorging what appeared to be an entire mechanized army. The tactical display updated continuously, showing human forces converging on their position from all directions. "They've been underground this entire time," Cranato whispered, the realization dawning on him. "The cities weren't abandoned. They relocated their entire civilization below the surface." "The radiation," another officer added. "It wasn't from self-destruction. They were the residue of large-scale manufacturing." Ezeview's mind raced, reassessing everything they had assumed about this planet and its defenders. This was no primitive species desperately fighting for survival. This was a carefully orchestrated ambush, years in the planning. "Open fire," he commanded, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Target their advancing forces with all available weapons." The Kravaxian defense systems came online, powerful energy weapons swiveling to target the approaching human vehicles, but before they could fire, the sensor officer called out again. "Multiple missile launches detected, sir. Hundreds of them, on direct trajectories towards our position." "Interceptors," Ezevu ordered. "Divert all power to the defense grid." The Kravaxian anti-missile systems activated, firing in rapid succession as they tracked the incoming projectiles. Bright flashes lit up the sky as the first wave of human missiles was successfully neutralized, detonating harmlessly above the landing zone. But even as they watched the interceptor countermeasures work, the weapons systems officer approached with a grim expression. "General, at this rate of expenditure, our interceptor arsenal will be depleted within 3 hours. The humans appear to have vastly greater reserves than we do." "What about our energy shields?" Ezevu demanded. "They'll hold against conventional weapons, but if the humans deploy the same class of nuclear weapons they used against our fleet..." The officer didn't need to finish the sentence. The implication was clear. Ezevu stood rigid, his mind churning through options that dwindled by the second. For the first time in his long military career, he could see no clear path to victory. Every strategy he considered ended in defeat, yet the thought of ordering a retreat, of being the first Kravaxian general in 3 centuries to abandon a conquest, was unthinkable. His internal struggle was interrupted as the ground began to shake once more. On the horizon, the first wave of human tanks and armored personnel carriers became visible, emerging from concealed entrances in the hillsides and forests surrounding the landing zone. The Kravaxian defensive weapons opened fire immediately, powerful energy beams lancing out to destroy the leading vehicles. Explosions dotted the horizon as the first human machines were reduced to burning wreckage. But for each one destroyed, 10 more appeared, continuing their relentless advance. Meanwhile, the sky above them filled with small, darting objects, unmanned drones that swarmed towards their position like angry insects. The defense system struggled to track these smaller targets while maintaining fire on the ground vehicles and intercepting the continuing missile barrage. "They're saturating our defenses," Kranato observed, his voice clinical despite the dire situation. "Forcing us to divide our attention and resources." Ezevu watched as the tactical display updated, showing the human forces completing their encirclement. The noose was tightening, and with it, his options narrowed to a single bitter choice. "Prepare for immediate evacuation," he ordered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "All personnel to their ships. We're leaving." The order was met with stunned silence, then a flurry of activity as officers relayed the retreat command. Ezevu turned towards his flagship, already calculating a breakout trajectory that might get them past the human cordon and back to space. But as the first groups of soldiers began moving towards their vessels, a deafening explosion rocked the clearing. One of the human missiles had penetrated their defenses, detonating against the shields of Ezevu's flagship. The barrier held, but the entire ship shuddered from the impact. "Shield integrity not compromised," reported a technician, voice steady despite the chaos. "We can still launch, but we'll need time to..." Another explosion cut off his words as a second missile found its mark, then a third. The impacts came in rapid succession now, some weakening the shields that were their only protection. "We need to launch, now," Ezevu shouted, already running towards the flagship's entry ramp. "Everyone aboard, immediately." But even as he gave the order, he knew it was too late. The human forces had closed the distance with remarkable speed, their vehicles now visible at the edge of the clearing. Energy weapons from the Kravaxian defensive positions still inflicted heavy casualties on the approaching armored columns, but the return fire was becoming increasingly accurate and devastating. One by one, the defense turrets exploded as human tank shells and precision missiles found their marks. The landing zone, so carefully selected for its defensive potential, had become a killing ground. Ezevu reached the ramp of his flagship, turning to urge the remaining soldiers forward. But what he saw froze him in place. The human forces had breached the perimeter at multiple points, their infantry now pouring into the clearing, supported by mechanized units that fired on the move. "Get inside!" Cranato shouted, pulling at his arm. "We can still—" The flagship's shields failed, with a cascading series of electronic shrieks, the protective energy field collapsing just as another missile struck the vessel's hull directly. The explosion tore through the outer armor, sending shrapnel flying across the landing zone. Ezevu was thrown backward by the blast, landing heavily on the ground. Through smoke and dust, he saw his ship, his proud flagship, listing to one side, its hull breached in multiple places. Secondary explosions rippled along its length as power conduits overloaded and fuel lines ruptured. "It's over," he whispered, the realization settling over him like a shroud. "We've lost." Around him, the surviving Cravaxian soldiers were forming defensive positions, using the wreckage of their equipment as makeshift barricades. But it was a futile gesture. Their primary weapons had been neutralized, their ships disabled, and they were outnumbered beyond any reasonable hope of resistance. In a final, desperate act, Ezevu activated the emergency transmitter on his armor, a device designed to send a compressed distress signal directly to Cravax Prime through subspace channels. The message was brief: coordinates, situation assessment, and a request for immediate reinforcement. But even as the signal departed, he knew the futility of the gesture. It would take 2 years for the message to reach the homeworld, and likely another 6 for a response fleet to arrive. By then, there would be nothing left to save. As if reading his thoughts, Cranato spoke from behind him, his voice oddly calm amid the chaos. "They weren't using their strongest weapons against us, General." Ezevu turned to his assistant, who gestured towards the approaching human forces. "Look at their restraint. They could have obliterated us from orbit, just as they did with our fleet. Instead, they disabled our weapons, our defenses, our ships. They're taking prisoners." The realization hit Ezevu with unexpected force. The humans weren't fighting a war of extermination. They wanted something else. "They want information," he murmured, understanding dawning. "Technology, tactics, perhaps the location of our homeworld." Cranato nodded grimly. "And we just sent them a directional signal they can analyze." Ezevu closed his eyes briefly, the full weight of his failure crushing down upon him. Not only had he lost his fleet and his invasion force, but he might have inadvertently compromised the Empire itself. The sounds of battle were diminishing now, replaced by the methodical advance of human forces securing the landing zone. Most of the Cravaxian soldiers had laid down their weapons, recognizing the futility of continued resistance. A new sound drew Ezevu's attention, the grinding of metal against metal. At the side of his damaged flagship, a human engineering vehicle had attached itself to the hull, its mechanical arms cutting through the armored plating with surprising efficiency. "They're breaching the ship," Cranato observed unnecessarily. Ezevu watched as the human device completed its work, cutting a perfectly circular hole in the side of his vessel. Through this improvised entrance, the first human soldiers appeared, figures in heavy armor, carrying weapons that looked primitive compared to Cravaxian technology, but had proven devastatingly effective nonetheless. As they advanced towards him, Ezevu stood his ground, refusing to show fear despite the circumstances. He had led invasions across dozens of worlds, had conquered civilizations far more advanced than Earth had appeared to be. Never in his long career had he imagined he would be on the receiving end of such a defeat. The human soldiers surrounded him, their weapons trained on his vital areas with great precision. Through their transparent visors, he could see their faces, so similar to Cravaxians in basic structure, yet alien in their details. Their expressions were not triumphant or vengeful, merely focused and professional. In that moment, General Ezevu had his final realization. These were not the primitive defenders he had expected to find. These were experienced warriors who had prepared meticulously for this confrontation, who had observed the initial scout force 8 years ago and spent every moment since then preparing for the inevitable return. As restraints were placed on his limbs and he was led towards the breach in his ship's hull, Ezevu understood with perfect clarity what had happened. The Cravax Empire had inadvertently awakened something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. Not just a species fighting for survival, but one that had turned the tables completely, transforming from hunted to hunter. For the first time in his life, Ezevu felt something he had never experienced before. the cold certainty that he, and perhaps his entire civilization, had made a catastrophic mistake in targeting this seemingly unassuming blue planet. The last thing he saw before being led into captivity was the Earth's sun, now setting behind the distant mountains, casting long shadows across the battlefield where his invasion had ended before it truly began. In the sky above, the debris of his own proud fleet burned through the atmosphere like falling stars, a funeral pyre for Cravaxian ambition and a warning beacon to any other species that might consider Earth an easy conquest. The general who had laughed at Earth's military would never laugh again.